Hey crafty people, welcome back to my channel, and in case you're new here, I'm Sarah, also known as Craft Nerd because I'm a nerd who loves to craft. I do paper crafting, card making, junk journaling, and mixed media art. Let's get crafting! Okay, so today I am going to show you 6 different techniques using a variety of stencils. And why 6 techniques? Because I took out a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper and my pad's 12 by 9, and so that cuts down into 6 by 3 pieces, which are a good tag size. So that's what we're going to be playing with today. So I've pulled out a bunch of stencils, and I also used some Yupo paper and a die, and this is a Tim Holtz Sizzix die. I think it's called the Gearhead. I'll leave the number down below in the description, and die cut out of Yupo to create my own stencil for one of them. And so we're going to start with, the first technique is we are going to use some texture paste, and you know what, I need to clean this mat off. Okay, so for the first one, I'm starting off with just a plain white piece of paper, and I am going to use, this is a Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous stencil, and it's THS034. And I am using, this is my new scrapbook.com mat that kind of grips pretty good. So it'll hold the stencil in place for me. Now this one's a bit of an experiment because I thought I had modeling paste in my stash, but I don't. So we're going to try matte gel, because what should happen is this should serve to resist when we apply distress inks to it afterwards. So I'm going to grab a couple palette knives out. I think I'm also going to try using the texture paste Opaque with this technique as well. I haven't really played around with it. Ooh. All right, I think my heavy gloss gel is dead. I've had some of these in my stash for a very long time, and stuff does expire. Hold on, let me grab just a scrap piece of paper and, oh yeah, this one's dead. Well, on the upside, it's getting me to clean out my stash, although I do have another jar of it. So let me grab that. Ah, that one's still good. All right. So that is a good reminder to use your mediums because they do not last forever. And for this one, I think I'm just going to cover the whole thing. I'm just trying to get a smooth coating of it over my whole piece. Now I also have, in case I didn't mention, a dish of water off to the side for me to toss the stencils into, so I don't have to be getting up and down every few seconds to check on, or to clean my stencils. All right, I'm gonna lift this stencil up, and we're gonna let this dry. Now you can use a heat gun on your texture paste, but it will sometimes cause things to bubble up. So I much prefer to just let them dry naturally. So I'm gonna set it aside. And that's part of why I started with that one. Now I'm gonna do a second one using the Tim Holtz Distress Opaque texture paste to see how that does. Because the matte gel is a transparent gel, not an opaque like modeling paste would have been. But since I've got a white base, it should be fine for the effect that I'm trying to get. But I am going to give my Distress Texture Paste Opaque a try since, you know, I haven't really used it all that much. And so I should play with the stuff I have, especially since, you know, it might go bad if you don't. And And I'm going to use the same stencil. Just going to set it down on some scrap paper. This way, if there's any goop on the back of the stencil, I can wipe it off onto there and not have it get on to my piece. And I'm just going to repeat the process using the opaque texture paste. Now this is definitely thicker than the Liquitex Matte Gel. All right, I'm sticking this in my dish of water so that the paste does not dry hard onto it. I'm gonna put this off to the side to dry. Gonna have a bit of a clean up. And then the rest of the techniques I'm doing, I want a colored base as my starting point. So I am gonna go ahead and pull out my Distress inks and ink up a bunch of backgrounds, which I don't think you need to see me do since I have done that on a variety of videos and I don't want this video to be ridiculously long, so I'm going to be focusing just on the techniques with the stencils. So I am going to go ahead and ink up the rest of these guys and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have gone ahead and inked a bunch of papers. So I've got a variety of inked bases to do some of these techniques on. So with this one, I am doing something fairly simple, and actually most of these techniques that I'm going to show you in this video are not all that involved or complex, except maybe the one involving the texture paste, because you need to let that dry. So for this one, I did yellows, and so I used Wild Honey, Squeezed Lemonade Distress Oxide, Mustard Seed, Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide, and Brushed Corduroy Distress Oxide to create my background. I'm taking, this is my Echo Park Honeycomb Hexagon stencil, and I'm trying to get everything to lay flat, because if it doesn't lay flat, this is not going to work so great. All right, I am going to pull out my magnetic mat. This is my Wendy Vecchi Make Art station, because that gives me magnets. So I can get my corners fully down. And for this, we're going real simple. And what you need to keep in mind is you absolutely need to use a water reactive ink for this technique, because what we're going to do is spray water through the stencil. And that's why it's important that the stencil's down, because if it's not, we'll have it seeping under the stencil and it will mess up the effect. And I'm just going to do a couple sections, not the whole thing for this one. And you're going to want to have handy either a clean paper towel or paperless paper towel, like a rag, something, because you're going to want to pat dry after you give it a moment to activate. So I'm going to spritz the area with my water, and I am going to come in and pat it dry. So it's going to lift up some of the ink. So we're going to have, and since I use oxides, we're going to have oxidation as well. So it's just going to, should leave the outline darker where we have the honeycomb, like where the stencil covers, if that makes any sense. And I'm going to do it again, I think, down in this corner. So I'm just going to move my magnets around. And going to go deal with the dog after I do this. So I'm giving it a second, letting it activate the ink, and patting it dry. And now we're going to remove our stencil, and okay, let me pull out my heat tool and see what happens if we dry. All right, I did not get the effect I was hoping for. I can kind of see a little bit up here, the hexagon pattern. I think the problem is I needed to use a stencil that this was too fine of a stencil for that technique. All right, so I'm gonna go deal with the dog and decide whether I'm gonna use this footage or not. Okay, so we're gonna try take two. I did add a bit more ink on, and I'm grabbing a Tim Holtz stencil this time. It's got bigger lines, so hopefully that will work better at leaving those lines behind when we spray. So again, I'm gonna spray with water, which will activate the ink. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna try a paper towel this time, see if that does a better job too. Picked up the ink. Let's get that spot and that spot all dried off. And then try again down in the bottom corner. Move my magnets around. All right, let's lift this up and see if we got better results. I'm gonna hit it with my heat tool. And again, a little bit of the hexagon shapes showing through. This is not working as planned. All right, I'm gonna have a bit of a think and I'll be back. Okay, this is attempt number 3, and I think I know what might be the problem is that our piece was not lying flat, and that's why it was not working as intended. So what I have done is, instead of wet inking the piece, I used my brushes and brushed on the same color combo, and instead of doing the texture side, because you'll notice with cardstock or with watercolor paper, there's a smoother side and a rougher side usually. So I went and did it on the smoother side. So we are going to try this one more time. And if it still doesn't work, I'm just going to cut this segment out of the video altogether. Because in theory, it should work. I don't know why it's refusing to cooperate, but we're going to try again. I've got a paper towel. Place that down and just soak up the ink. And then I'm gonna do it again down here. I'm just gonna add another magnet, shift my magnet, shift my magnet. So let's see. Okay, I think we finally got it this time. And I got a little bit of texture in there from the paper towel, and I am happy with how that turned out. Yay, success! And you can kind of faintly see the pattern on the rest of it from the stencil sitting on there. I don't know if it's showing up. Let me see. I don't know if you can see, it's showing up a little faintly in this region too, but there we go. That's what I was trying to achieve, and I finally did it. Huzzah! Okay, for our next technique, we're going to do something fairly similar to the last one, in that we're just going to work with our inked piece, a stencil, and some water. But this time we are going to spray the water onto the stencil and essentially use the stencil as a stamp onto the piece. Now, having learned my lesson from the last one where we didn't have much luck with the, sorry, I'm just trying to flatten that out. The inked smooshy background, I have also done one where I've used the exact same colors, and as you can see, completely different results, but where I just used a makeup brush to apply the colors to the piece. And the colors I used for this are Salvaged Patina, Rusty Hinge, Uncharted Mariner, Scorched Timber, And then I used the Distressed Oxides in Uncharted Mariner and Scorched Timber. So we're going to try it with this one first, but I've already got this made up, so we can go straight to trying that one if it does not work. I am going to spritz it with water off to the side because I don't want to activate anything anywhere else. So I gave the back of my stencil a fairly liberal spraying with water. I've got a piece of paper towel standing by to help with this, and I'm going to put my stencil down and put my paper towel down and just press and smoosh. And then we're going to lift up the stencil, and I can see the water on there, and I'm going to pull out my heat tool and just give it a good heating. Actually, first I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to give it a good heating, and we're going to see what we get. And yeah, I think, again, the issue is the background's a little too busy. It's not really showing up. So, having thought ahead, we have option 2. See, because it definitely did reactivate the ink on there. And I'm going to set that on a paper towel and blot off the ink. And we're going to try this again. Again, I'm going to give a liberal squirting of water on my stencil. I'm going to flip it over and apply it down to my piece. Just going to make sure it's pressed down good. Oh yeah, it's definitely working much better on this one. And I am going to do this to pick up the water. Oh yeah. All right, so what we have learned here is the less busy background works better with doing this technique. I also think I really need to flatten these guys out better because yeah, this came out much better. You can see it definitely here. I wish I had gotten a little bit more water on the bottom one, but I really like that. That is really cool looking. Okay, so there we go with that technique. So success, not success. But hey, I don't mind leaving in my failures so that you know what does and does not work. All right, for our next technique, we are going to stamp through a stencil. And I created this stencil using some Yupo paper and a die. And I am going to place it here. And I'm pulling out some yellow tape because I don't want to worry about getting it over here because I don't want to stamp that cog there. So I'm just going to add a little low tack tape to cover that up and to hold my piece down. I'm going to suggest you can either make a stamp yourself or make a stencil yourself or use a stencil you already have. You're just probably going to want to pick something that's got some more open space. Like this would probably work well, but I think you're not going to have as good of a result with a stencil like this. But so I've got my gear stencil. I've grabbed, this stamp is Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous, and I think it's Reflections. And I'm going to use it. And for this one, I'm going to stamp with Versamark ink and use some embossing powder. Because I think that will look cool. So I'm just going to ink up my stamp. Place it here. Push it down. And need to grab my Stampin' pressing. Need to grab this to help get a good impression. It's my homemade stamp pressing tool. I'm gonna peel this up. I'm trying to see if I actually got any on. I don't think I got any stamping on there. All right, we're gonna try this again. Because yeah, there's no ink on there. All right, that did not work. So try this again. And I think I'm going to take it off the block because then I'll be able to push it through better. Hopefully it's not stamped where I don't want ink. Not that it worked last time, but all right, we're just going to press down and hope for the best this time around. All right, we're going to try adding the embossing powder and see if I actually got anything on there. Oh, I did. I have a feeling this is not going to be the right choice for embossing powders because it's kind of a chunky embossing powder. Probably would have been better off using a fine embossing powder, but that's okay. We get a grungy look. That's not going to bother me so much. I am actually going to go ahead and heat set this just because I don't want to have to worry about replacing my stencil and messing up the embossing powder on there. And let's do another one over here. Again, I'm going to use tape to kind of cover up where I don't want. Actually, let's grab a piece of scratch paper and tape. I'm going to do that and that. And we're going to try inking this again. And I think I may stick another scratch piece over there just to make sure everything's covered up. And of course, I think I'm holding it, and we'll see if I'm holding it upside down or not, although I don't think we're going to be able to read this at all. I'm just pressing down, doing my best to make sure I'm getting good contact. And add the embossing powder. And I'm using, this is a really old Stampin' embossing powder. And again, I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss it. And we're going to go one last time in the bottom corner using the smallest gear. All right, I think the small one gave me the best impression of like the gear shape versus the bigger ones. So I'm a little disappointed I didn't get as much of the gear shape as I was kind of hoping for out of this. But I still think it's kind of cool, and I will probably go back in and add a little bit more inking just to kind of grunge it up a bit more, maybe? I don't know. But that would be our next technique, is stamping through a stencil to create a new and interesting look on your piece. Oh, and in case you were wondering, it's Aged Gold is the embossing powder I used by Stampin'. Okay, for our next technique, we're going to do something similar to the last one. And please excuse how I sound. I have been sick, and I'm still not 100% better, but I'm getting so tired of just sitting on my couch watching TV. The flu is kicking my butt. So the colors I used to create this inky background were Antique Linen, Spun Sugar, Victorian Velvet, and then Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide. And what I'm going to do for this one is I'm grabbing another stencil, and this is Tin Tile by Simon Says Stamp, and it's SSST221565. I'm going to apply clear embossing ink through the stencil, and I'm using a embossing dauber for that. Now, you can use ink straight from your ink pad, but I would not recommend applying your Versamark ink pad to an inked background, because it will lift up the ink that's on this background, and it will then be on your ink pad. And when you go to stamp with the ink pad again, it will then transfer to what you're stamping. Ask me how I know. And I've also pulled out, I think I'm going to give my Tattered Rose Distress Embossing Glaze a try for the embossing powder that I'm going to use. And again, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I think I'm going to do a little pattern up here and a little bit of the pattern down there. And I'm just going to dauber it on and kind of smush it around. And I am not squeezing the bottle. I'm just patting the tip down onto my paper. And I'm going to pull over a piece of paper to catch my excess embossing powder. And I'm just going to sprinkle it on. The one nice thing with an embossing specific powder is there's a lot more drying time, so you have more time to get your powder on. The joy of humid Florida, my embossing powders tend to clump together in the jar. Don't worry if you have this problem, it will break up. I can come in with something like this and just break it apart. It's not really a huge problem. Just trying to make sure I've got it everywhere before I pull out my embossing gun. Ooh, this one is really, really clumpy. All right, now I'm just going to grab my embossing gun and emboss it. All right, that is quite a bit more subtle than I was hoping for. I'm not sure how well it's showing up on screen. It's actually showing up better on screen, I think, than it is in person. So it is very, very subtle. You, of course, could have done this with an opaque embossing powder. And what I may do is I may come in with some Victorian Velvet ink and just go in here and darken around where the embossing is, because what we can then do is the glaze will resist the ink. And so I can take a damp cloth and just kind of rub over where the glaze is. And so hopefully it'll stand out a little bit more because we've made the areas around it darker, but the areas underneath stay lighter. And so that will hopefully bring out the embossing a little bit more. In this section, I think I may have over embossed a little, and so that kind of causes the glaze to sink into the paper, and so it doesn't resist as much. But you can see it, and definitely when you get the light reflecting off of it in real life, but it is not quite what I had in mind. I think that's just strictly from the standpoint of I picked a color that was too light because I didn't want anything too intense on this. And the embossing glaze is translucent, so you can see what's underneath. And this just didn't add enough color contrast on top of the inking. But it's definitely there. And again, you can do the technique using different colors and different embossing powders. So that was technique number 5. For our last technique, we are going to add some powdered pigment to some heavy gloss gel. Now you can use this with matte gel, opaque paste, like whatever medium you want to use, you can add pigment to. I'm using Lindy's Stampin' Gang Magical Steel Shimmer. So it's a sparkly silvery color. And I'm gonna just put a little of it on my mat, which means I'm gonna end up sticking a body part in it in all likelihood. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit of the powder pigment, and this one's got shimmer to it, but you can use a matte pigment like Brushos or Color Burst, or any of those would also work for this technique. And if you don't have any powdered pigment, you can use a Distress or Distress Oxide re-inkers. Just go very gentle with adding it, because you don't want to add too much liquid to your various texture pastes and mediums, because it's going to cause it to like break up and separate potentially. So I'm just going to mix this up over here. And this gloss gel is getting lumpy bumpy. It's probably getting close to outliving its prime. Because, yeah, as I've mentioned, I think earlier in this video, there is a shelf life to your mediums, so you should use them before you lose them. And I'm using a Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous stencil. It's THMS 76, and the inked background I've got is this one that I did, and it has milled lavender, seedless preserve, and hickory smoke, and the Distress Oxide. The milled lavender and seedless preserves were Distress inks. And I'm just going to apply the center kind of to the middle of this. And I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to be annoyed at myself because I did not mix up enough to cover the whole thing. All right, so we're going to grab a little bit more and mix up a little bit more. And you'll notice I'm not using a whole heck of a lot with the powdered pigments. A little goes a long way. That's the problem with mixing in two batches, is they never match up quite right. This one definitely got more pigment than the second batch, but hopefully it'll still look cool when we are done. All right, let's lift and see how it came out. Ooh, 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 ooh. So there's what it looks like right now. I'm going to set it aside and let it dry, and we will come back and take a look at it, see how it looks when it's all dry. So our piece is covered in matte gel, and opaque texture paste are dry. And I was apparently not paying attention and didn't clean off the edges, so that I've got little rough bits here. You can just take an emery board and basically file that off to clean up your edges if you forget to clean it up while the paste is still wet. So that's a quick little tip. If you forget to clean off your edges, just a quick file with an emery board will take that off. Now I am going to ink these guys up with sprays. So I had a bit of a mishap with my silicone mat that usually protects my desk, and I'm looking at this, and this piece is a little too small. So I am going to, oops, bump the camera and put down a couple pieces of watercolor paper just to protect the surface from the sprays. And this is the matte gel piece, and I am going to use some tea dye, Shabby Shutters, and Kitsch Flamingo sprays, and a little bit of water. Probably going to go ahead and give it a little quick spritz just so that they move better. So a little Kitsch Flamingo, do a little Shabby Shutters on there, and a small amount of tea dye around the edges. I'm gonna just I want more Kitsch Flamingo. There we go. I'm just gonna kind of move it around, hopefully get ink in all of our areas between the paste, and grab a paper towel. See, I think I want to let it dry so that it can dry in the crevices and then clean off the spots. Just adding a little bit more in places. All right, so I'm gonna set this guy aside to dry and spray the other one. Ooh. I am, however, gonna just use, see where I've got all that pooling, my paper towel to absorb that, so we don't have like a harsh, muddy line along the one edge. And we'll set this guy aside to dry. And I am gonna dry this off and flip these pages over because I'm gonna use a different color scheme for the other one. Okay, so I just added some more ink to the other one and set it aside and grabbed a new piece of watercolor paper to protect most of the disc. It'll probably go everywhere, but that's fine. All right, I'm gonna spritz with water again. And for this one, I'm gonna be using Lindy's Stampin' Gang. It's a Moonshadow Mist, and it's Tawny Turquoise. And then I've grabbed some Salvaged Patina and Peacock Feathers Distress Spray Stains as well. I'm gonna start with the Salvaged Patina. Add a little Peacock Feathers. Make sure I'm pointing the thing at the paper and not myself. And then the Tawny Turquoise, which it has an iridescence in it. So when you shift it in the light, it will come out. You'll get the shimmery turquoise color. All right, I'm going to set this aside to dry, and then once they're dry, we will reveal the, well, we'll see if the reveal works with the Distress Opaque Texture Paste. I am having a lot of hard difficulty with my words this morning. So we'll come back and take a look at this once this is dry. Okay, so they are dry, and now we're going to check to see how well the resist actually worked. If the two mediums we used actually will work for resist, since they were not the ones I had planned on using. So I'm just taking a little paper towel and dampening it just a little bit. And I'm going to come in and a little bit. I think a little bit's coming off on this one, but not much. So yeah, no, not really working. That one didn't resist, and I don't think the opaque texture paste resists. Wait, maybe a little bit. Oh, wait, yeah, no. I'm a little surprised. I just spritzed it with water, which was not what I planned on doing, but all right, so we got a little bit of a resist going on with the opaque texture paste. And it's working more with the Lindy Stampin' Gang inks than with the Distress inks. So yeah, it did not work out exactly how I had envisioned. But again, I had intended to use modeling paste, which is a little bit more plasticky than either of these two. Remember, this is the Distress Opaque texture paste, and this one is was the heavy matte gel that we used. And I've not tried resisting with either of those before, so I wasn't sure how it was going to work out, and didn't come out exactly as planned. But what you can always do if you really want to get back the white is I could put the stencil back over and go over the areas that are raised with a white paint, or it's probably the best bet. A white ink probably not going to work so great. And bring back the whiteness of the stenciled image. So, and I don't know how well you can see the Lindy Stampin' Gang, the metallic is showing up a little bit around the edges in here, but is not coming through as much as I would have liked. There's a little bit showing over here and over here. I don't know how well that's showing on the camera, but that's all of our techniques. So let's take a look at everything we did. So we started by putting texture paste through a stencil and then adding inks. So that was that one. For this one, we put water through the stencil and took away our distress inked background. And again, remember for this, you're going to need a water reactive ink. Then we did a variation on that where we sprayed water on our stencil and basically stamped onto the piece with the watery stencil to take away some of the ink. And I really like how this one came out. Then we stamped through a stencil, and again, this was using the gear stencil that I created from Yupo, which just as a little follow-up on that, the Versamark ink does not dry on Yupo. I ended up having to wipe off the ink because it was still tacky like days later. So just bear that in mind. This one I think came out the best. You can kind of see the spokes from the gear. But so we stamped through the stencil and then embossed with embossing powder. Then we did embossing ink through the stencil using an ink dauber and embossed with Distress embossing glaze. And I don't know, it might show up better. It's showing up a little better today than when I first did it and showed it on camera. And I think that's because when I first did it, it was at night, so the light wasn't as good. So we've got that one. And then finally we have the piece where we mixed pigment powder with our texture paste and put that through the stencil to get this result. And there is a bit of shimmer to this because we used the silver metallic Lindy Stampin' Gang powder for that one. So there you go, 6 techniques for using stencils on your product that doesn't involve just putting ink through your stencil. So that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do all the things that lets YouTube know you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave me a comment down below. Thanks for joining me, and happy crafting.